do have a question.
Yeah,
Would be so, a lot of my story is about, what could be called these deconstructions, and I use that term loosely, but right,
yeah,
these
yeah.
these moments
That's
where,
been the term that's kind of
yeah,
ascended now.
yeah. So, yeah, I mean, one of my inclinations is to treat those as an important part of the spiritual journey, and even to, if not welcome them, then at least, yeah, find a way in which we understand that there's a sort of progressive nature to our deepening relationship with ultimate reality,
Yeah.
and that there may be particular images or concepts, uh, practices, what have you, that we use that help mediate our relationship with the divine, let's say, that as we progress, eventually lose their efficacy, or we kind of outgrow them in some meaningful way, or just circumstances change in such a way that we find ourselves that they fall apart, they fall away, and then we're forced to kind of land on new ground. And in my personal experiences, I hopefully communicated, while these experiences have been incredibly difficult and upsetting to go through, on the whole, when I look back, I feel like my perspective now has been profoundly enriched by all of those disruptions and deconstructions, to the point where, from where I sit now, um, things are so much more alive and anti-fragile in a way that I find important. So that's my conception of it. But I'd love to hear you share your thought about the role of deconstruction in a faith life. Is it necessary? Yeah, I don't know.
I think often it is. I know in my own journey, some of the most important, um, some of the most important growth has been because of collapses.
Mm,
And I think maybe I'll use that word that comes out of your story, sort of a collapse.
mm-hmm,
I say that I say that with I want to say a couple of other things too. Number one, as you said very well, collapses are never fun and they are costly.
mm,
And that sets up the number two, that I don't when I talk to someone, and again I often relate both online and in person in a pastoral mode, because
sure.
um I don't I don't I don't see collapse as necessarily a catastrophe. It might become a eucatastrophe. That might
Mm-hmm,
happen, but it doesn't always. And so part of the sobriety with which I approach collapses in real people's lives is the knowledge that sometimes Humpty Dumpty doesn't get put back together again. And
mm,
I watch those. And I also sometimes see one of my most important videos I ever did, and some people claim it's their favorite, was the I don't even remember what I entitled it. It's basically the fact that I have often seen wisdom, beauty, and wisdom, beauty, and strength in simple Christians as opposed to the sophisticated.
mm-hmm,
That I can see, let's say, someone who perhaps the faith that collapsed for you never collapsed for them.
mm-hmm,
And I often see such Christians outperforming the sophisticated. And now that, so now I've just set up a value hierarchy there. Um, and well, okay, what do I mean? What do I mean by performing? And for me, if I'm doing evaluation of, let's say, a narrative or a story, it always sort of pans out in these two elements that Jesus brings forward. They're not unique to Jesus, but when you know, you love the Lord with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and you love your neighbor as yourself. One's and loving God and loving your neighbor are deeply intertwined. And and so sometimes I see collapses, and I kind of hold my breath, because
mm,
while there is breath, there's there's usually hope and time for putting something back together. So at Ark, there was an artist who spoke, and I'd never heard of the guy and I haven't really looked him up since then, but all of his art was about broken things rewoven.
Mm.
And he noted a beauty in that,
Mhm.
the cup, for example, he had a cup. Um, the original cup was a beautiful thing, but the cup now had a new, enhanced, glorified beauty because it had been broken and now re-put together. And I think that there is something deeply Christian about that, and inherent in the Christ story.
Mhm.
And it's inherent in the the promise of resurrection and the
Mhm.
promise of new creation. And it's deeply inherent in the Christ song in Philippians 2. It's really nice not having to explain these things as a pastor. It's like, oh, I can use a shortcut with you. Those of you who are watching, you're gonna have to look it up yourself. Sorry, I'm not gonna fill in my shortcuts today. But in this Jesus self-donating and then being risen to the highest place.
Mhm.
And so that's why I don't necessarily panic when I see deconstructions, especially in those I love around me. It's scary, but of
Mhm.
course, any good story has peril in it. If there's no peril, it's not a story, and
Yeah.
it's not going to be a good one. And so with the collapses, there's peril, and the peril is real because not all collapses have happy endings. Now, I can lean into, that all of these bad things will become untrue. I can lean into that. But that, of course, is a posture of deep and strenuous faith.
Mhm.
So I think you're exactly right that I don't necessarily see collapses as tragic, even though sometimes they are. They are often full of peril. I don't know that they're always necessary,
Mhm.
but I think it is part of the larger story. And as Chesterton pointed out, with the regular deaths of Christianity and the reconstitutions of them, and I also see this as so the video I just released today was about Jordan Peterson's ecclesiology, because
Mhm.
I don't ecclesiology um is the theological locus that tends to get the least it's beneath almost everything, but it's not
Yeah.
terribly sexy like
Yeah.
Christology or theology or anthropology or soteriology, but it is in some ways the most applied.
Mhm.
and And obviously, the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century was a crisis of ecclesiology.
Mm.
And I think we are again in another crisis of ecclesiology, because the church endures and continues, but there are transformations within it. And in every transformation in the age of decay, there's always loss and sometimes something beautiful regained.
Mhm.
And so I think we're very much in a place like that.
Mhm.
And so in terms of individual lives, I see collapses, and I sort of hold my breath,
Yeah.
hoping for a eucatastrophe.
Yeah.
But it was beautiful. Just one last thing.
Yeah, of course.
It was beautiful in Jordan Peterson's recent opening himself up to a really earnest Catholic, who really wants Jordan to cross the line and come to Rome. And Jordan's talking about his wife's journey into the Catholic Church.
Mhm.
And it's not good. It's great. It's really great. And he notes that all of the stuff that he's known in his wife for, I mean, he's been in love with her since he was a boy, as he says. And it's such a beautiful story. And what he's seen is that her now, after in some ways a death and resurrection,
Mm.
she is becoming more of herself and yet a better self. And so he
Mhm.
sees this transformation within her, and he can testify to that. Now for him at this point, that doesn't mean joining up with Rome.
Hmm.
And I respect him for that decision. I know he gets a lot of flack for it, and I can understand the critics and probably fair critiques in many ways. But I think what we're seeing is his is another instance of this. If metamodern is the right word, maybe we'll know in 200 years because these things do get renamed. But I think that is very much part of what you are seeing
Hmm.
and what you have lived. And I think I see it very deeply in this little corner of the
Hmm.
internet, in both the sort of orthodox wing that Peugeot is residing over and the Vervaekian wing that is the Silk Road wing, and even in my land of misfit toys that is sort of streaming and doing all this crazy things with
Hmm.
with branding and lucha libre masks and everything. So I think yes, I think very much so, and that's why I'm not I'm not anxious about the collapse that we are seeing in America now and that has happened in Europe.
Hmm.
And I'm not anxious because of my faith in a a very strong and providential God, but I am not naive enough to believe that at least within the frame of people's lives, all of these collapses will be mended.
Sure.
And then that leads into whole nother theological
Sure.
conversations. But that's really where I'm at.
Yeah.